My Govanen. Welcome to the Tolkien Lore Channel. I'm the Tolkien Geek, and one of the things that I got a lot in response to my video on, well, a couple videos really, but mainly the video about why Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy captured the loyalty of so many diehard book fans, is a lot of different things, but the one that I want to talk about here is this idea that a one-to-one adaptation would be a bad idea, and we're looking at two different mediums, and so all these comparisons are really not fair and all this. And I really think this is a misguided defense of Peter Jackson. I'm not saying anything about the fact that in my original video where I talked about this, I never said Peter Jackson should have done a one-to-one, absolutely 100% faithful adaptation of the books. For one thing, that's basically impossible. The only real way to do a 100% faithful adaptation of the books would be to do a book reading. That's kind of it. The narration can't be captured in a movie the way that you can do it with just a simple book reading. There's just different aspects to book and movie. My point in that video, which a lot of people seem to have completely missed, and I don't understand this. I think people just don't really pay attention. They hear something or they see, the slightly intentionally provocative thumbnail that I used and just immediately assumed what I was going to say without actually listening to it. My point in that video was, given that the people who were complaining about the Rings of Power are complaining about how it violates canon or, is completely inaccurate and changes the story, my point was, given that that's true, the same thing could be said of Peter Jackson's trilogy. He changes a huge amount of details. Now, there are people who pointed out and argued that the kinds of changes that Peter Jackson made are much smaller. They're more like little details. They aren't huge chronological or plot elements, and therefore it's not the same thing. I'm not here to argue that point in this video because that's really not what I'm here about, but I will just say I think there are things in Peter Jackson's trilogy that are pretty major changes too. But what I want to really focus on here in this video is this idea that somehow I and other, book purists, you might say, are not taking into account the fact that books and movies are two different media and therefore they have different needs and whatnot. I totally agree with that. I don't have a problem. I've done a whole video on why Peter Jackson was actually probably right to take Tom Bombadil out of the story, because for a movie, that just doesn't really work very well. It's perfectly fine in the book, or I think it is, but a lot of people would even disagree with that. Plenty of people think Tom Bombadil was a horrible section of the whole book. Personally, I think those people need to, maybe pay a little more attention, but that's a different story. But there's two kind of general criticisms that came with this. One of them is the idea that this 100% faithful adaptation would be just a boring documentary. I mean, if you read The Lord of the Rings and you think it seems like a documentary, maybe that's your speed. I don't know. That's not what I would think. Do I think that it would be as engaging to a modern audience as the Peter Jackson trilogy? No. But I also am pretty confident that this is why Christopher Tolkien criticized Peter Jackson's trilogy as action movies for teenage boys. The book is not an action-packed adventure story. It has action elements in it, and it is an adventure, but it's not that kind of story. It just isn't. So there's some things going on there. There was also other criticisms, like I said, that were just more generically about this idea that, you have to take into account the difference between the two mediums. That's all true, but am I demanding too much to say that Peter Jackson could have been more faithful? Let's just look at a few examples, right? Just a handful. One of my biggest complaints about Peter Jackson's trilogy is the absolutely atrocious and inexcusable treatment of Faramir, who becomes a radically different character under the handling of Peter Jackson and his writing team. The Faramir of the book is a far more interesting character. Now, would you be able to develop Faramir's character in exactly the same way in a movie as you would in a book? No, not necessarily, because having him sit down and interrogate Frodo for 10 minutes solid in, the middle of the movie probably wouldn't be a very effective technique in cinematic storytelling. Okay, that's fine. That doesn't mean you had to change his character and make him actually want to take the ring. You could have just, kind of weaved in some of the elements that were there in the book in different ways in the movie and not had him cart Frodo and Sam off to Osgiliath. Another example that I used, I think, in that prior video is the Weathertop scene. The Weathertop, the whole Weathertop thing in its entirety is so different in the movie and the book, and there's no reason why you had to be that different. In fact, I think it would have been an interesting movie scene, and Ralph Bakshi, I may be forgetting, but Ralph Bakshi may actually do this in his film. But there is, I think, a lot of cinematic value actually to having a little bit more lead up to Weathertop and have the conversation between Sam and Aragorn and everybody else about starting a fire, and Sam saying, "Oh yeah, well let's just give away our position," and Aragorn say, "Fire is our only friend in the wilderness," instead of getting this kind of klutzy thing where Frodo falls asleep not that late, and then all the other hobbits are over there cooking on a fire, and Frodo wakes up and puts out the fire on the theory that, oh, this is dangerous, and therefore we can't be having a fire because it's going to give away our position, and screams it at the top of his lungs, which of course is totally not going to give away their position. The scene in the movie is not only not anything like the book, it's kind of stupid, but also there's this whole element of, why did it have to be different in the first place? The whole idea of the changes to Weathertop being somehow necessary for the cinematic method of storytelling is nonsense. And all the people who came up with this kind of retort, none of them really had any specific examples or gave concrete arguments for this sort of thing. They all just kind of laid down the law of, the idea that because it's a movie, you have to make changes. No joke. I know that. But if you can't explain to me why this change was necessitated because it's a movie instead of a book, you're not arguing against my position. You're just stating an aphorism that has no real application in the moment. I mean, that doesn't tell me anything interesting or useful or anything like that. Now, there are, of course, things where this is true. Like I said, the Tom Bombadil example is one. I mean, I think you could include him in a movie. It's just a movie that not as many people would like at that point. And there's other aspects of it, too. Like I mentioned, Faramir talking with Frodo for 10 solid minutes, and then Sam interrupting and all that before they finally pack up and head off to Hineth Anun. That kind of stuff you will have to change. And, those are legitimate cases where you do want to do things differently in a movie than in a book. In a book, you can take all the time you want. There's no pressure to be out in 2 to 3 hours because people have to be places and they can't sit in a cinema for, however long. So that's fine, but again, like you look at the actual examples I pulled and talked about in my video about how off Peter Jackson's trilogy is, all of those examples are not explainable by, well, this is a movie, so we have to change it a little bit. None of them. There are myriad changes in the Peter Jackson trilogy that are not explainable by, oh, well, this is a movie. Like, for instance, Aragorn cutting the head off of the mouth of Sauron in the extended cut. That's just not necessary. I mean, if you didn't want to have the whole scene, that's fine. Again, cutting things short for sake of time in a movie, that's fine. But if you're going to include that in the extended cut, why on earth did we need to end it that way? It goes against who Aragorn should be as a character. It goes against the morality that the good guys in this story are supposed to have. It's not necessary. And there's tons of other things, too, like Denethor's character, as a whole, not just Faramir, but Denethor, too. Denethor's character is pretty radically different in this movie than in the book. In the book, he is a wise and intelligent and effective leader who has a few very serious moral hangups. In the movie, he's a complete idiot. And Theoden, too. I've done a video about how Theoden's character is radically different. None of those needed to be the case for this to be, a movie instead of a book. Another one that kind of comes up a lot is this idea that, well, you've got to have a character arc. And this is, supposed to explain why Theoden's character is different and why Faramir's character is different and why... No, you don't have to have a character arc for every single character. Some of these characters are minor characters and don't need character arcs. Faramir doesn't need a character arc. His role, even in the book, is small enough that there isn't really much time for a character arc, which is why he doesn't have one. He's a minor character. I love his character. He's a great character, don't get me wrong, but he's still a minor character. Who are the characters that need character arcs? From the perspective of the book, the characters that we're following that really need character arcs are first and foremost Frodo and Sam. Secondarily, Merry and Pippin. Why? Those are the main characters. If you read, and I might have done a video on this, translating the title page of The Lord of the Rings. I think I did that. I know I've done some translations of different things in The Lord of the Rings that were written in Elvish or Dwarvish runes. But if you read the actual title that is there, it's, the history of the downfall of The Lord of the Rings as seen by the little people. I'm leaving out some stuff. But the point is, the whole thing is, this is written by hobbits. It's from their perspective. They are the point of view characters. They are the people that we follow from beginning to end, who need character arcs because they are the people who we expect to have character arcs. Aragorn doesn't have a character arc, or much of one, in the book because he doesn't need one. He is a semi-mythic level character as far as the hobbits are concerned, and his role in the story is not for them to be, observe him become a greater person than he already is. Now, he does have a little bit of a character arc in the book, but it's not anything like what they try to do with him in the movie. In the movie, they turn his character into something completely different. He's a reluctant king where he's like, I don't want that power. I have never wanted it, and all this other stuff. And then I've done a whole video on this too, where I've talked about how he just completely messes up the whole plot with Aragorn's character, because by the end of the whole thing, it's like he just suddenly out of the blue is like, oh, okay, I'll be king then. And people have tried to argue with me about, why they think that it actually works because of Boromir's death and the other things that he goes through. I don't find any of that convincing. Maybe you do, but, that's, to me, it doesn't work. The character arc in the movie just does not fly, in my opinion. You can say that it does for you, I just don't buy it. But the point is, not every character needs a character arc. Legolas doesn't have a character arc. Gimli doesn't have a character arc. In the movies! I'm not even talking about the books now, I'm talking about the movies. Legolas and Gimli have no character arc. They have, less character arc in the movies than in the books, probably. So this argument that, well, Theoden needs a character arc and Faramir needs a character arc. No, they don't. They actually don't. So this idea that you can explain all these changes that Peter Jackson made by, well, it's a movie. No. That's just, no. That's not accurate. There are some of those changes that you can explain that way. For example, the fact that we skipped all of the Old Forest and Tom Bombadil. Sure, because we're trying to save time and we don't have 45 minutes to go spend in the Old Forest and the Barrow Downs. much as I would love to see the Barrow Downs in a cinematic adaptation done well. But this idea that the book purists are all just totally unreasonable because we're not taking account of the fact that movies have different needs than books. No, there are so many things that Peter Jackson could have done right that he didn't do right that still would have worked perfectly well or even better cinematically. And I'll leave you with my favorite example of this. I have long said, and I stick to this, that the scene between Eowyn and the Witch King would have been better cinematically if it had been done according to Tolkien instead of the way they did it. But they turned it into a girl boss moment instead of just doing what they did in the book, which was so much better. Here's why it's so much better. In the movie, we get this thing where Eowyn, of course, says, "I will kill you if you touch him," and then she ends up killing the fell beast. The Lord of the Nazgul gets off, and then basically breaks her shield and comes over and is about to kill her and says, "No living man can kill me." Mary stabs him from the back, and then Eowyn tears off her helmet and says, "But I am no man." Yay. So we got our great feminist moment. In the book, it's so much better because what happens is all of that conversation happens before the Witch King ever gets off of his flying creature, whatever it is. And he says, "No living man may hinder me." And then Eowyn laughs, which is just great by itself, and then takes off her helmet and says, "No living man am I." And then it says in the book that there's a pause because the Witch King is basically like, "Oh, this might be a problem." Now, it doesn't say that exactly in the book, but you know that's what's going on. How much better would that be cinematically for Eowyn to literally laugh in the face of the Witch King and say, "I am no man," and the Witch King to actually have this moment of, "Oh." The Witch King, who is, even as Gandalf in the book says, maybe more than a match for him, and who has terrified and killed every other person that he's come against ever in history, to suddenly be concerned because a little woman down there is standing in armor and about to, at least put up a fight, if not do something else. How amazing would that be cinematically? So again, don't tell me that Peter Jackson's changes are all excusable because that's just, book to movie adaptation. No. The difference between Peter Jackson's and the Rings of Power may be more in the category of Rings of Power just made bigger scale changes, but it's not excusable on the grounds of, he had to make those changes because it's a movie. No. Anybody who is making that argument and doing it because they actually think that's just cope. Let's be honest. It's just cope. Peter Jackson could have done much better in being true to the original story and still been fantastic cinema. And if you don't believe that, I think you have a little too little faith in Tolkien's original story. So, that's my take on that. Hope you enjoyed the video, and if you didn't enjoy the video because you think I'm an idiot, that's fine too. Comment away, it still helps the algorithm. If you did like it, please give it a thumbs up, share it around. Subscribe if you want to catch my future content. If you're on YouTube, make sure you click the bell icon so you get all the future notifications. Follow me on the platform formerly known as Twitter to get Tolkien-related trivia questions every week, and check out the description below for other support and social links. Until the next time, I am the Tolkien Geek, signing out for the Tolkien Lore channel. Namarie. Thanks to all my channel supporters, especially elf friends Nathan Dufour, Robert Kindling, and Stephen Clayton.